Hail and well met. I am your humble narrator Amanda, here to entertain, amuse, perhaps even educate with tales of daring do and daring don't. And in return, all I ask is that you stay a while and listen. Miracle rolls. The GMs watching this are now nodding their heads. Some of the players are too, the ones that have been lucky enough to have a miracle roll. What's a miracle roll? A miracle roll is one of those dice rolls that changes an entire campaign from the ground, like completely turns it around. Maybe the party were about to be wiped. Maybe the actual campaign story had been going in a totally different direction, and it meant this one roll means that the GM either willingly or unwillingly changes the direction of the story entirely. There's no telling which is going to be until it happens. But what is a miracle roll? It really depends on the rules in the particular game. Sometimes it's just a crit that is unusually key. Like, for example, you could be in the middle of a battle with a horde of orcs. You roll a crit and you manage to kill the orc chieftain with a single attack, which demoralizes his troops who run away. That's a miracle roll. But there are other types of miracle rolls depending on house rules. My house rules are a little bit different, which I'm sure you've probably already guessed. My house rules are this. A crit is anything between a 1 and a 5 on a D100. So 2 10-sided dice, roll it. Oh, I got a 5. It's a crit. Crits are really good. And I have lots and lots of tables that I wrote out myself because I like making life hard for myself. And I mean lots of tables based on crits and potential things that could happen, from everything from like you roll a crit versus a spear wielder while wielding an axe. Yeah, I have a crit sheet for that. There's only about 20 possible permutations in that one, but some of them I have over 100. It really depends on what's happening. And there are other GMs like me. They are primarily, like me, somewhat OCD. Well, this is a story of a sewer. So it's a kind of sticky and messy. It is a tale of daring don't. Why do I say daring don't? Well, don't go into a sewer without curatives for cure disease. Because guess what? Walking around in shit isn't healthy. Who could have guessed? You know? It's like poop everywhere. I'm going to bathe in it. No, don't bathe in the poop. Don't bathe in the poop. It's bad for you. So, the setting is Greyhawk, which is the quintessential fantasy setting. And that is really what Greyhawk is. It is the quintessential setting. And it is the distilled average of fantasy settings. And it's also quite fun. I really like Greyhawk. I use it with GURPS I would say all the time, but most of the time. And it's one of those settings that translates well to almost any system. I've played in a Greyhawk game that was run with D20. I've played in a Greyhawk game that was run with Saga. We'll get to that at some stage. But this day I was running the game and it was a party of halflings. I don't know why. I didn't roll the characters. The party just as a group decided that they wanted to play halflings. All of them. So, you know, about that height. Really short. You know, furry feet. Hobbits, basically. And, you know, I'm okay with that. I'd already figured out this adventure and it was up to them to come up with what they wanted to play it with. So I was like, yeah, okay, you want to play hobbits? I'm cool with that. And wow, my lighting's really freaking weird today. Maybe this will help. Probably not. Forget about it. We'll make do. We'll make do. By the way, I hope the sound is better. Anyway, so yeah, they decided they were going to play halflings. And I had already decided that this particular adventure was going to be largely sewer based. This being one of those rare medieval type cities that actually has sewers. It also has massive overpopulation, so you can imagine how full the sewers get. The party is composed of a cleric and 3 fighters. 3 fighters. Yeah, guys, way to go with balancing the party. So, they're brought before the lord of the town, who tells them, "My child has been kidnapped by a monster the guards described as tentacles and teeth. They saw it drag my child into a culvert and down into the sewers. Everyone I've sent after them has died and come back, you know, dead. As undead. Zombies, basically." So they're all going, oh, okay. This is going to be like a vampire lord or something like that, who's just using polymorph. Because you can do that. No. Have you ever heard of a beast called an Otyugh? And now some of you are nodding, and so the rest of you are going, what the frick is an Otyugh? An Otyugh is basically, how to describe it? Have you seen Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope? You know when they go into the trash compactor and the eye comes... Whoof, whoof, whoof? That's basically an Otyugh. I can't remember the name of those in Star Wars. I know it starts with a D, but I don't remember the actual name for it. Irrelevant anyway. This is basically the AD&D equivalent. And they do, I think it's 1d8, 2 1d8 damage and 1 2 to 5. I know they have 6 to 8 hit points. I also know they's bastards, because they basically live in piles of offal and filth, and they make alliances with other subterranean creatures because they've no interest in treasure at all, which means they make great guard dogs for treasuries. And many subterranean beasts love gold and diamonds and, you know, treasure. So it makes for a great semi-symbiotic relationship. The Otyugh gets all the offal and feces and dung that they can eat, and the other side get all of their shit taken care of. And yeah, literally and figuratively, actually. So the party go, all right, we're going to a thing we think there's going to be undead. So the cleric who is level 3 takes turn undead and cure disease. Fair enough. I mean, you're going into somewhere disease-ridden, and you're going to want to deal with undead because you think you're going to have to deal with undead, which they did, but we'll get to that. The rest of the party basically equip themselves with things like maces, because when you're dealing with the undead, you want stuff that smashes. Cutting doesn't do a whole lot to the undead. Whereas a broken bone, that's a broken bone. It's a good way to go. So they're down there with their it's very difficult to describe anything funnier than a halfling fighter carrying a warhammer. And I don't mean like a warhammer the size of, like, you know, your average claw hammer. I'm talking about a warhammer that's about the size of a guitar. So, you know, it swings it back, and it actually has to make a dexterity check to see if it loses its footing. Every time. Players can be really dumb at times, and then they can be really lucky. So they go down into the sewers, and they're moving through the muck, and they're like, it's pretty horrible, and I get to do some of my favorite things, which is describe really horrible things. So I'm talking about how everywhere they see like floaters on the surface of what they really hope is water. Newsflash, it's not. And like, as they move along, they can feel stuff going into their boots. It's getting, because they're smart enough at least to wear boots, even though they're hobbits and halflings and they don't typically wear footwear. They're smart enough to wear boots in this situation. I'm describing how they can feel stuff squelching between their toes, and one of them goes, "Why the hell am I wearing boots?" And he takes off his boots and flings it behind him, and a few steps later he steps on a sharp rock which cuts his foot. In a sewer. In a fantasy setting where basically any disease you could put the word hyper in front of, and it's pretty accurate, because in fantasy settings normal diseases don't seem to exist. It seems to be this extremely high-speed version of whatever disease it happens to be. So it's like, you don't just catch clap, you catch hyper god-ridden clap, which rots you from the groin out. I usually call this demonic crotch rot. Demonic crotch rot is basically any STD in a fantasy setting, because they affect all diseases in role-playing games more or less, affect your character so quickly. It's truly nuts. Moving on. So of course he cuts his foot, and I'm like, okay, so you have to roll under every 3 turns to see if you contract a disease. Guess what? He contracted a disease on the first turn. But he's like, okay, it's minor. I'm only losing health points gradually. We'll use cure disease when we have to. So the cleric is there, you know, ready to go do his oogly boogly, and no. He goes, no, no, no. I'm tough. I can take this. We'll deal with it later. So they move onward. And eventually they come across zombies, and they have a hell of a time. They have a whale of a time, because these are like old school zombies. You know, they're old school zombies, basically. They don't move fast. They hit like a truck if they hit you, but they don't move fast. And these halflings are pretty nippy, even when they're up to their thighs in sewage. So they manage to hammer them under. One of them gets hit a couple of times, ends up with a nick in his skin in a sewer. So right now you're thinking, okay, this doesn't seem to be going very well. Yeah, there's 2 of them who now have open wounds in a sewer. And they move on. And they eventually come to this huge chamber that has been basically cut out underneath the city. And it wasn't cut out by the human inhabitants or the elven inhabitants or even the dwarven inhabitants. It's been cut out by... I still don't know what it was. I know I was basing it on a lich, but it wasn't really a lich. It was more like a vampire plus. It was badass, I know that much. But it was also smart. It saw these guys coming, and the cleric and went, yeah, screw this. You guys, you deal with them. Turned around and walked away. Fine. Fine. Yeah. All of a sudden, the party are being swarmed by lesser vampires, who I think have a thing in this. I know vampires do. I don't know if lesser vampires do. But presume that they do. That's no, that. Crap. Come on. There's got to be vampires in this. There's got to be. No way there's not vampires in this. Yep, there is. Page 99. Okay. So, 99. I really need to get... vampires. Yeah, they don't have a thing in here for lesser vampires. But, considering I would have been basing it on this, I probably halved its attack damage and halved their hit dice. So, yeah, damage on attack with this is 5 to 10. So, it was probably like, I don't know, like 3 to 8 or something like that. And hit dice in this is 8 plus 3. So, it was probably something like 4 plus 3. But like they were fighting like 5 or 6 of these lesser vampires, and the cleric was coming to the fore because the cleric's a freaking holy warrior, basically. And he's like, I cast turn undead, and he crits. You're thinking this is the miracle roll. No, it's not. So he crits, and the light of his god shines forth from him, turning the lesser vampires to dust in an instant. Bing, 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 bing. Loads of XP, except that, of course, they don't level up, because the way I did it is you leveled up at the end of the play session, not during the action. Tabletop role-playing game. Not PC. So, all these lesser vampires are toast. And I just turn to them and I say, you hear the greater vampire, the vampire master, it was a master vampire, talking to something in the background, and you hear this splushing sound. And they're like, okay. The cleric's like, okay, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to do this. I'm going to do this, man. I'm going to do this. And he notices that there's a ramp. And there's a ramp that leads to, obviously, where the master vampire used to hold court. So he goes up there and he's waiting for whatever's going to come out of this tunnel. And bounding out of this tunnel comes an Otiug. What's an Otiug? I'm glad you asked. An Otiug kind of, well, the way I described it is it kind of looks like a sperm with multiple legs, a big sucker-like mouth filled with sharp teeth, and like eyes on stalks, and 2 tentacles that have really sharp edges. So they're basically a combination of tentacle and sword. They do 1d8 damage, or 1d8 damage by 2 for arm attacks, and 2 to 5 for a mouth attack. It doesn't sound so bad, does it? Yeah, except that they're Otyughs, so they're freaking badass. I mean, these were like Otyughs from a later version of the monster manual. I'm not even going to open that one because it's too out of date for this particular monster. So the party are like, oh crap. And the cleric is, I rolled to see if I can do a plunging attack on him. Yeah, he pulled it off. Chris! So the Otyugh at this point, like, we've rolled for initiative, and the Otyugh is 3rd, the cleric is 4th. The Otyugh whips out his things, he injures and actually cuts a hand off of the one uninjured halfling. He badly injures another one, and because it's a 2-arm attack, so it's 1d8 by 2 times 2. And you know, the 3rd halfling is staring, like, going, oh shit, oh shit. And the cleric is like so he rolls a crit, and he because of course he has a mace, because, you know, clerics don't draw blood. Actually, if you've ever seen damage that a mace can do, it draws a lot of blood, but we'll leave that aside. So he plunges down, and it's like, whoom. The Otyugh loses one of the tentacles. It's gone. Of course, here's the problem. Now all 3 of the party have a disease. All 3, and the Otyugh is pissed. The cleric no longer has the high ground either, so he can't do an Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is where the miracle roll comes in. Now, every playing session, every person, every GM has their own house rules, and they're rules that they use to make games belong more to them. And I have many house rules that I use or don't use depending on the setting, but there is one house rule that is universal across all settings, and that is my rule for the miracle roll. What's a miracle roll? A miracle roll is what happens if you get 3 crits in a row. Not only do you get the 3rd crit, but I roll a secret roll on a table I made up myself that has like 500 entries on it to see what happens. So it's like, so it has 500 entries, and then each of those 500 is broken down into groups for, like, say, on land, in water, underwater, in sewer, in dungeon, in air. You know, basically the idea is that I roll this, I find this the right part of the table, I roll against it, and then I massage what's in the table to fit the circumstances that they're in. So I was like, okay, where's the cleric one? Oh, okay, here's the... So he rolls a 3rd crit, and he gets his crit, and he's like, I throw my mace in through the mouth of the Otyugh. Because he can do that. He's facing the Otyugh. And of course, it's a crit. So it goes through, and I get to describe this Otyugh's teeth being shattered, and the mace plunges in, burying itself into the flesh, the soft flesh inside the Otyugh's body, making mincemeat of its brain, crushing its heart, and killing the fell beast. Which is fine. Now here's the thing. You get a miracle roll, yes. That's the crit roll. And the miracle roll happens in the next turn. It's something that happens because of the 3 crits in a row that isn't in the direct control of the player. The Master Vampire is coming back. And he's got blood in his eye. His lesser vampires, well, some of his lesser vampires have been killed. His Otyugh is dead. Someone used his goddamn throne platform to do a plunging attack. This guy is pissed. It's like, I'm going to fucking kill you. I'm going to suck your blood. I'm going to turn you into a lesser vampire. And then I'm going to feed you to my other lesser vampires. This guy is really pissed. And so he comes stalking out of this tunnel, which is actually fairly dry because it's not down. The lower level is up higher. And the finger goes out. I am going to destroy you. Yeah, not so much, because the miracle roll kicks in. So the master vampire casts, basically swoops down, and he grabs the strongest of the surviving vampire halflings that isn't a cleric, and starts to feed on him. And the cleric is like, everyone's like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, and I've rolled. So I turned to the cleric and I'm like, I said, did you ever read the little pamphlet I gave you about house rules? Because I had a little pamphlet at the time that I got printed out and I gave it to people with house rules. And he was like, yeah, hang on. I was like, and he was like, miracle roll. I was like, yes, miracle roll. He basically did his best Prompto impression from Final Fantasy 15. Basically the same kind of person. He even had a really good camera, come to think of it. So I've rolled for the miracle roll. It's cleric, it's the table for cleric, it's table for subterranean, and it's the table for undead. The party are starting to wilt. The two remaining party that aren't being fed on, they've lost half their hit points due to disease. The cleric is exhausted, because I have an exhaustion table in it, of course I did. And the cleric is like, okay, what happens, what happens, what happens? And everybody else is like, what happens, what happens, what happens? I'm like, you hear this whispering in the back of your mind that gets louder and louder and louder, and eventually it gets so loud that even the vampire turns away from his feeding. Vampires feed quickly, but like it still takes time to drain the blood from even a halfling. And he turns and looks, and as he looks, this blazing light bursts forth from the chest of the cleric as the cleric's god, who I think was one of the Sylvan gods, bursts through his body, incinerating the master vampire, turning him to dust, and cleanses all within a 1 mile radius of any and all diseases. Above you in the streets, lepers look as their hands, which have been missing fingers for years, suddenly are without any scabbing or any damage, and the fingers have regrown. Blind men can see, the deaf can hear. Brothels are suddenly no longer filled with the sound of desperate scratching. Basically, it's a miracle. It's literally a miracle roll. And the party are like, you mean we survived? Really? That was fucking awesome! Dude, do it again! Of course, it never happened again in this gaming campaign, but this is a miracle roll. It's like one of those rolls where it's one of those things where I actually think GMs should have rules put in place for when it happens to make the absolute most of it. And I made the absolute most of it because all of a sudden you have this circumstance where every diseased person in the city is cured. All of them. And actually beyond the city. Everyone within a mile's radius of this miracle, this manifestation of a god, is cured of anything that was ailing them. Anything at all other than old age. So suddenly you have people without arthritis. You have people who can suddenly see. You have people who can suddenly hear. You have people who... all sorts of incredibly difficult life-altering problems. They don't have them anymore. It's like, the fuck, dude? This is awesome. It's awesome. But all of a sudden you have the various groups of doctors in the city pretty pissed because their business is gone overnight. You have the Lord who is like, okay, they're going to now have a truly ridiculous amount of authority, of, you know, potential power. I better claim responsibility for this. Gods don't like people who lie. Just saying. You have a essentially it turned this one-off adventure, which was all about rescuing a child from a sewer. And in this case from a hungry Otiug, who they're opportunistic omnivores, so it has no problem eating a child. It turns it into, from an adventure about that into a political intrigue, because here's the thing: they don't rescue the child. Too late, far too late. One of the lesser vampires was the child, so you have this situation where the Lord is like, you didn't rescue my child and you've destabilized my kingdom, my city. Yeah, you're my enemy now. And the party, are, to give them credit, are smart enough to realize, oh shit, this could actually turn out really bad for us, because it does. But it was a miracle roll. It changed the campaign entirely, and this is why miracle rolls are really important. A miracle roll should be a fulcrum to turn, if your campaign isn't going the way you wanted it to go. If there's a miracle roll, and you're going to have to come up with your own definition of a miracle roll, and it has to be fair, and it has to be within the player's power. I mean, to get it, not what happens. You should have them because they can take a impossible campaign, an impossible story, a story that is basically taking the campaign off the rails, and you can completely pivot the campaign on that one moment. You can also give the characters, the players, one of those incredible moments that they will remember for their entire gaming life. And they're just fun. They're a lot of fun trying to come up with what happens. I mean, I've had 2 miracle rolls happen in the entirety of my gaming career. And the second one basically amounted to, this guy again was doing a plunging attack with a sword, and you know, the barbarian, yeah! And there's a miracle roll, and he ends up going through a wormhole. He was going to hit the monster and die because it was off a cliff. But this wormhole appears and spits him horizontally at the monster, and his reactions are fast enough that he decapitates the monster. And this is witnessed by many, many, many people, and it leads to him becoming essentially a folk hero, which changed the tone and the direction of the campaign entirely. Miracle rolls are wonderful things, and you should use them. They're rare, which is a good thing, because they can totally derail a campaign as well. I mean, like I said, that one with the Otyugh was going to be a 1-session game, and it ended up being like, I think it was 5 or 6 sessions, while the party tried to figure a way of, you know, getting out of the city alive. Because like 4 halflings traveling together are kind of hard to miss. Not least when the cleric is bound and required by the laws of his order and his god, and will be punished if he ever takes off his holy vestments. He's not allowed to remove them, ever. He has to sleep in them. He can change them. That's it. So if he's ever seen in public, or by anybody else, he has to be wearing them. You know, things like that. How do you get out of a city when everyone knows that they're looking for a halfling wearing the vestments of? And if they get you, they're going to get your friends, because they're going to torture it out of you. Yes, I know in real life torture doesn't work, but in fantasy settings it does. So that was the story of the miracle roll. My first miracle roll. And it was awesome. It was amazing. And I really, really, really recommend that GMs have some kind of system in place to allow for a miracle roll that isn't just like a really opportune crit, but instead is something that rewards insane good luck. Crits are lucky, but they're not insanity. 3 crits in a row? That's fucking insanity. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story. I'll be back again next week with something else. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Be good. And as always, fuck YouTube.